Buckle up, film fans, because today we are taking a deep dive, and I mean a deep dive, into the world of Rafael Corkidi.
A fantastic choice, really.
Right. This is a filmmaker you really wanted to learn more about, and honestly, I'm excited to go beyond the more familiar territory.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, everyone knows him as the cinematographer behind Jodorowsky's El Topo and The Holy Mountain, but you were interested in something different.
His directorial work, right?
Exactly. You want those hidden gems, and from what I've seen prepping for this deep dive, gems they are. Though hidden might be a bit too literal in some cases. Did you know some of his films were considered, get this, lost?
Oh, absolutely. It's almost a cliche, isn't it? Lost films resurfacing like cinematic buried treasure. But in Corkidi's case, it adds another layer to his story, wouldn't you say?
Totally. It's like that extra bit of mystique.
Yeah.
Plus it makes you think about how a film gets lost in the first place, and more importantly, how it gets rediscovered. But before we go full-on film detective, let's give everyone a bit of context.
Right, of course. So we are talking about a really interesting period in Mexican cinema, a time when experimental film was just starting to find its footing. And Corkidi, well, he wasn't content just dipping his toes in, he dove right into the deep end.
And then he kept swimming, right? Because he went on to pioneer video art in Mexico.
Yeah.
Always pushing those creative boundaries. It's that innovative spirit that really comes through in his visual style, which I am itching to dig into.
Oh, trust me, we'll get there.
But first, I think it's important to understand the man behind the camera a bit better. So where does Corkidi fit into the grand scheme of Mexican cinema?
Well, it's important to remember that Corkidi wasn't just making art for art's sake. He was deeply connected to his country and its people. You even mentioned in your notes that you're especially drawn to films that have something to say about the world and that social consciousness. It's all over Corkidi's work.
He was a champion for everyday people, wasn't he? The working class, the poor, the marginalized.
Absolutely. He championed Mexican national pride, but not in a nationalistic way. He focused on the people, especially those who were struggling. And that wasn't just some personal belief he kept separate from his art. It infused everything. The settings he chose, the stories he told, it's all there on the screen.
So he used his platform to shed light on those realities, to give a voice to the voiceless.
Precisely. And his work didn't go unnoticed. In 2013, late in his career, he actually received the Ariel de Oro, which, for those who don't know, is basically the Mexican equivalent of the Oscars.
Wow, that's huge.
It was a Lifetime Achievement Award, recognizing his contributions to Mexican cinema. And I think it's even more meaningful considering the whole lost film situation. Talk about a comeback story.
Right, it adds this whole other layer of appreciation for his work. So to recap, we have this incredibly talented artist who wasn't afraid to experiment, to push boundaries, to use his art to explore social issues. Where do we even begin to unpack his unique visual style?
Well, to truly understand Corkidi's genius, I think we need to start with his visual language.
Ooh, I love a good secret language. Tell me more.
Think of it this way. His visuals are more than just pretty pictures. They're a window into his entire worldview.
I am intrigued. What kind of world are we entering when we watch a Corkidi film?
Get ready for a visual feast. Think desolate landscapes, crumbling ruins, and villages that seem frozen in time.
Okay, that sounds pretty atmospheric. But knowing you probably see those desolate landscapes as symbolic of something deeper, right? Some reflection of the human condition or something.
You know me too well, but we'll get into those interpretations in a bit. First, let's talk about how Corkidi uses surrealism to explore these themes.
Ah, yes, surrealism. Because we don't want to scare away any listeners who aren't familiar with the movement. So for those who haven't taken an art history class recently, what exactly is surrealism?
In a nutshell, it's all about tapping into the subconscious mind, about blurring those lines between dreams and reality. And Corkidi, well, he uses it masterfully.
So it's not just about being weird for the sake of being weird.
Yeah.
He's using these surreal elements to make us think, to question what we're seeing.
Precisely. He's a master of using the unexpected to make us see the world in a new light. And trust me, when it comes to Corkidi, there's a lot to unpack.
Well, then, let's get this unpacking started.
Yeah.
Okay, so desolate landscapes, crumbling ruins, untouched villages, it's all very evocative, but what's the deeper meaning behind these recurring visuals?
Well, with Corkidi, you got to remember, he's not just using these landscapes as backdrops, right? They're like visual metaphors for the struggles his characters face.
Okay, I like where you're going with this.
Yeah.
So it's more than just pretty pictures. It's about reflecting a certain mood or feeling.
Exactly. Think about the weight of tradition, the search for meaning in a world that can feel pretty unforgiving, those landscapes. They become a character in themselves.
So he's using the environment to mirror the internal journeys of his characters. I'm picking up what you're putting down.
And don't even get me started on the costumes.
Oh, yes. I did mention those in my notes, didn't I? I think I called them extravagant.
That's one word for it. But it's more than just extravagance, right? He's using clothing to make a statement. Think bold silhouettes, unexpected textures, a touch of the theatrical. It's like a Fellini film went on a pilgrimage to the desert.
Okay, now that's a visual. So he's playing with these striking outfits to tell a story, but what kind of story?
Each outfit, it's another layer revealing something about the characters, whether it's their personality, their social standing, even their inner turmoil. It's all there in the details.
So we've got these larger-than-life characters, literally draped in symbolism, wandering through these desolate, almost mythical landscapes. It's like a dreamscape, but with a message.
And speaking of dreamscapes, we have to talk about the role of religious symbolism in Corkidi's work. I know you were drawn to those recurring crosses, the biblical figures. They add another layer, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. It's like he's having this silent conversation between the spiritual and the secular, and it's all playing out against these visually arresting backdrops.
Exactly. And this is where his use of surrealism really goes beyond just aesthetics. He's juxtaposing these religious symbols with everyday life, you see. So you're forced to confront these contradictions, to question those easy assumptions.
He's not afraid to make you a little uncomfortable, is he?
Not at all. He's not trying to preach, mind you. He's using these symbols to explore the complexities of faith, of doubt, of what it means to grapple with those big questions.
It's like he's asking, what does faith look like in a world that's often harsh and unforgiving? How does that belief system hold up against the realities of daily life?
Precisely, and those are tough questions. But he's exploring them through these powerful, often unsettling images. Speaking of unsettling, you mentioned being particularly struck by those burning trees and angels and cherubs and that exploding fruit.
Oh my gosh, yes. Those images have been stuck in my head since I read about them. They're so vivid, so unexpected. What's the story there?
Well, Angels and Cherubs, that's probably the most overtly surreal film on your list. So we've got these burning trees, right? Set against this backdrop of, well, nude children playing. And those flames, they represent paradise lost, a stark reminder of how quickly innocence can be corrupted. It's classic Corkidi, using this striking visual as a shortcut to a complex theme.
And the exploding fruit. I have to admit, that one has me stumped.
Pure surrealism at play there, my friend. Think of it as a visual metaphor for what happens when we try to suppress our natural instincts.
Okay.
Do they just vanish? Not quite. Sometimes they erupt in ways we never could have predicted.
It's like those desires are like fruit left out in the sun too long, right? They're bound to go bad eventually, but not always in such a, shall we say, dramatic fashion. But you know me, I love a good, vivid image. And there's one more I can't shake. That woman crucified beneath the Pepsi sign. That's from Figures of the Passion, right?
Yes, that one image. It just encapsulates so much of what Corkidi's trying to convey. You've got the clash between traditional values and modern consumerism, the hypocrisy he saw in Mexican society, the exploitation of the vulnerable. It's all there in that single, unforgettable frame.
It's so jarring. You can't look away, and that's what makes it so powerful, right? It forces a confrontation with those uncomfortable truths.
Precisely. Corkidi's not afraid to provoke, to make viewers squirm a little. He wants you to think critically about what you're seeing, not just passively watch. He's demanding something from his audience.
He wants your attention, not just your entertainment.
Exactly. Now, before we really get into the weeds, I think it's time we give you a taste of how all of this, the themes, the visuals, play out in some of his most notable films.
Yes, let's get specific. I'm ready for some film breakdowns. Where should we start? All right, so we've laid the groundwork, talked about Corkidi's overall style. But now let's dive into some specific films. Yeah.
Sounds good to me.
Where should we start?
Well, we already started talking about Angels and Cherubs, so.
Yeah, we did touch on that one, didn't we? With the burning trees and all that.
Exactly. And that's a good one to unpack a bit further, just to give a sense of how Corkidi really pushes those boundaries. I mean, we're talking dreamlike sequences, telepathic puppets, bizarre rituals. It's a lot to take in.
It really does sound like a wild ride, even for Corkidi. And it sounds like he really went there with this one, both visually and thematically.
Oh, absolutely. This one's got it all. Nudity, blasphemy, religious commentary. It's definitely not for the faint of heart.
And yet, even with all that, all the controversy, he still earned praise for the sheer beauty of it all, the artistry. It's kind of amazing when you think about it.
It speaks to his talent, doesn't it? That even critics who found the pacing slow or maybe the narrative a bit too elusive for their tastes, they couldn't deny the power of those images.
So what you're saying is with Corkidi, sometimes you have to just surrender to the experience, let go of those traditional expectations, and just feel it.
Exactly. It's less about following the story in a linear way and more about letting those images wash over you. Let them evoke something, a feeling, an idea.
I can get behind that. Now, we talked about Angels and Cherubs, which you called overtly surreal, but then there's Anticlimax on the list, and that one's interesting because it's a collaboration.
Ah, yes, Anticlimax, a really fascinating project. So Corkidi was the cinematographer on this one, but the director was Gelson Gass, who was a well-known poet and artist in Mexico at the time.
So we're seeing his visual style through a slightly different lens with this one. How would you describe the end result of that collaboration?
How to put it? It's a fascinating blend, for sure. Anticlimax is definitely more experimental, a series of vignettes that offer these glimpses into life in Mexico City in the 1960s. And of course, because it's gas, there's this undercurrent of existentialism running through it all.
Vignettes. So
yeah,
not straightforward narrative then.
Not at all. Think of it more as a series of moments, feelings, little details that, when you put them together, reveal something profound about the human experience. And Corkidi's cinematography, it's what brings it all together.
What do you mean?
Well, he uses these stark black and white shots, often with these very deliberate, almost theatrical compositions. It creates this sense of both realism and alienation at the same time. Like he's capturing the soul of Mexico City, the beauty and the ugliness all mixed together.
Does that social commentary, again, shining through in those visual choices?
Always present. But you're right, in Anticlimax, it's subtler, more poetic.
Which makes sense, given Gass's background. Now, this brings us to The One Who Came from Heaven. This is another one that caught my eye, just the title alone. Plus, we see Corkidi returning to his Christ allegory, but with a twist.
Ah, yes. The One Who Came from Heaven. A really interesting take on the allegory. What struck you about it?
It's surprisingly grounded, isn't it? Especially considering the subject matter. It would have been so easy to go for this grand, epic feel, but instead he makes it feel so intimate.
Exactly. Corkidi's Christ figure in this film, Anapu, he's not this remote, untouchable deity. He's walking among the people, right there on the street, sharing their struggles.
And then you have this fascinating juxtaposition with that fascistic military figure, right?
Exactly. It highlights the very real struggles that everyday people were facing, the systems of oppression, the fight for basic dignity. It adds this whole other layer to the Christ allegory, wouldn't you say?
Totally. It's like he's taking this grand mythical figure and bringing it down to earth, reminding us of the humanity at its core.
Exactly. And he does it through those small moments, those intimate interactions. A shared meal, a listening ear, a touch of compassion. Those little things that speak volumes. Speaking of which, did you happen to catch that detail about the lip syncing?
Oh, you mean in The One Who Came from Heaven?
Yes.
That was one of those details where I had to stop reading and just go, wait, what? It seemed so out of place, especially given the serious tone of the film.
It's Corkidi, always keeping us on our toes. But
Right.
when you think about it, it makes a strange kind of sense, doesn't it? That disconnect between what we say and what we truly feel.
The masks we wear, yeah.
Exactly. And the music is often operatic, which adds another layer of surrealism. It's jarring, but it makes you think.
You're like, don't just watch this passively. Pay attention. Question everything. Okay, we have two more films on our list, and both have these intriguing titles, Deseos and Pafnucio Santo. Let's tackle Deseos first. What's the deal with that one?
Deseos, which translates to desires, is, as you might expect, a film about longing and the complexities of human connection. It's a really fascinating blend of surrealism and melodrama, visually stunning, with those rich textures and a haunting score.
The source material hinted at some pretty intense themes at play here. What can you tell us without giving too much away?
Let's just say that Corkidi isn't shying away from those darker impulses, jealousy, obsession, that blurry line between love and possession. He tackles it all with his signature visual flair, but there's also a raw, emotional honesty in Deseos that's really captivating.
This sounds like it might be a bit of a roller coaster, both visually and emotionally.
You could say that. Okay, last but not least, we have Pafnucio Santo. This one follows a young boy on this almost mythical quest to find a woman to bear, get this, a messianic child.
A messianic child. Now, that's a new one.
Yeah.
Okay, what's the significance there? Is this a religious commentary, a social commentary, or something else entirely?
It's a bit of both, actually. On one hand, you could definitely read it as a commentary on the pressure to conform to societal expectations, especially within the context of traditional Mexican culture. And of course, the Catholic Church's influence is impossible to ignore.
Right.
But
Right.
it also works on a more universal level, right? It's about that very human search for meaning and purpose, that yearning for something bigger than ourselves.
Okay, I'm with you. And visually, how does he bring this quest to life?
It's a visual feast, as you might imagine. You've got historical figures just casually interacting with everyday people, fantastical landscapes that seem to shift and change with the characters' moods, and yes, you guessed it, more opera.
Of course. There has to be opera.
But this time it goes beyond just highlighting that disconnect between words and feelings, though that's definitely still there. It also touches on the power of art, music in particular, to transcend those barriers and create a different kind of connection.
It's like he's saying that sometimes words aren't enough, right? Sometimes we need something more visceral, something that bypasses the intellect and goes straight for the heart.
Exactly. And that, I think, gets to the heart of why Corkidi's films are so fascinating. You've got the social commentary, the spiritual exploration, those unforgettable images. It all comes together to create this really rich tapestry.
It's the kind of film that stays with you, right? It makes you want to go back and rewatch to see what else you might have missed.
Exactly. There's always something more to discover with Corkidi.
You know, I have to say, before we started this deep dive, I knew very little about Rafael Corkidi. Now I feel like I've stumbled upon this hidden treasure trove of cinema history. This is an artist who wasn't afraid to push boundaries, to challenge conventions, to make us think.
He really is an inspiration, isn't he?
He really is. He reminds us that sometimes the most profound truths, they aren't found in those easy answers, you know? They're in those lingering images, those unexpected juxtapositions, those moments that make us stop and re-examine everything we thought we knew. And who knows, maybe this deep dive will inspire our listeners to seek out his films, to have their own aha moments. Because ultimately, that's what it's all about, isn't it? It's about sparking conversations, challenging perceptions, reminding us that even in those desolate landscapes, even in those moments of darkness, there's still beauty to be found. There's still meaning.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, I think we've done our due diligence for today. We've taken a deep dive, explored some uncharted territory, and hopefully come away with a newfound appreciation for the genius of Rafael Corkidi.
Hear, hear.
Thank you, as always, for joining me on this journey. And to our listeners, happy watching.
Take a deep dive in the sound. Feel the echoes all around. Voices whisper in your ears. Unlock the stories, have no fears. Let's escape into the stream. Ride the waves within the theme. Open minds and let it fly. Join us in this deep dive. Get on your spin, film fans. We're not sliding down the main street. You're about to take a deep dive, if you know what I mean. So grab your headphones, let it flow. Explore the topics, watch them grow. Join the journey, feel the vibe. Together we're taking this deep dive.
The Deep Dive Film Talk podcast is wholly generated by artificial intelligence. All of the research materials gathered were taken from the archives of another podcast and used wholly with permission. Copyright 2024 Weirding Way Media.